Chapter 28. Code Black. It was a bit after 5:30 in the morning. Jan was up and dressed in the breakfast nook eating her breakfast when the emergency call came in on her phone. Childers. Jesson, ma'am. 500 warships split among 4 classes, Earth Standard Design, another 100 ships logistics and supply. Coming in from the north. Hypertransition 14 minutes ago. Looks like they really mean it. Your recommendation, Tian? It's Code Black, ma'am. Right on profile. Do it. Childers out. Code Black. Code Black. Code Black. This is not a drill. Black 5. Black 5. Black 5. The message went out to all CSF units in Jablanca space. It was followed by a 1,000-character decrypt key to allow admirals and ship's captains to finally decrypt the Code Black orders that had been kept updated in their computer systems. Those orders were specific on a per-ship basis, and a lot of things started to happen at once. 31 destroyers or courier ships in Jablanca were detached from their commands and immediately headed at their best speeds for the southern system periphery, opposite the incoming Earth Armada, one to each of the Commonwealth planets, to repeat the Code Black message and decrypt its key. As soon as they hit the outer envelope, they transitioned into hyperspace. 4 fast shuttles left Sigurdsson, fanning out across Jablanca. Each planetary member of the Commonwealth had 3 members of the Council, and they and their families were being evacuated. 3 additional Council members were on an inspection tour of Sigurdsson this week, and 1 shuttle was dispatched to their hotel to pick them up. The other 3 went straight to the councilors' homes, or in one case, a local restaurant, following the now activated radio signals of the ID tags they wore. They took the simple expedient of making a hot landing on the lawn or street, bundling the counselor and his family aboard, and heading straight to battleships in orbit. And the inventory was maintained in the large containers used shipboard for easy evacuation. Cargo tractors began pulling long trains of stacked containers out of warehouse doors onto the ready pad. Cargo shuttles, intended to lift the heavy containers to space, began ferrying the containers to CSF freighters in orbit. Sirens wailed across Sigurdsson. Emergency evacuation. Code Black. Emergency evacuation. Code Black. This is not a drill. There were tears in Jan's eyes as she said goodbye to her babies. Max, now 22 months old, didn't understand anything was wrong and gave her a big hug before she handed him off to Katie, her primary childcare for the morning, who had just come on. Peggy, almost 4, knew something was up. When Jan squatted down to hug her, she asked, "Mommy, why are you crying?" "Ask KK, honey. Mommy has to go to work now." "They'll be okay with us, ma'am. We've done our drills too. You go now and do what you need to do," George said. Jan and Bill took the car down the hill into the base. They dropped Bill at the Intelligence Division headquarters. He gave her a quick peck before he got out. "See you aboard." The base was in a state of controlled, pre-planned bedlam. People queuing at the bus stops were surprised when senior non-coms used flares to lay out landing points on the lawns of the base next to the queuing points. Shuttles started dropping from ships in orbit, screaming in under combat landing protocols, and landing on the lawns in front of them. "All right, settle up, hustle it!" As Jan went into the NOC, sappers with UV lights were setting demolition and incendiary charges on the marks that had been painted in UV paint on the inside and the outside of the building years before. The commander-in-charge was checking them off from a list as they were emplaced. She walked into the building behind an electronics team that was headed to the server farm in the secure basements to pull the memory modules with the redundant server backups that were running right now in response to the Code Black. When Jan got there, her office was abuzz with people getting ready to depart. She punched a code into the intercom. "Jesson. Childers. Tian, what's my ship?" "Lakshmi Bai." "And her captain?" "Pavel Nimsky." "Excellent. See you aboard. Childers out." In queue for evacuation, Petty Officer First Class Charlie Gunderson was grousing. The intel that Jablanca was being attacked by an Earth fleet had run completely through the base within 30 minutes of the Code Black alarm. "Yeah, I don't like this bugging out. We should fight them." "We are fighting them," Senior Chief Ashok Gonzalez said. "Well, how do you figure?" "How long we been doing evac drills?" "Couple of years." "We ever do evac drills before Childers was CNO? Ever?" No. See? I don't get it. This is all her plan. She's got a plan to fight him and she'll win. Her plan? She's always got a plan. Well, how do you know? I was at Kodu. Oh. 3 passenger liners in orbit were commandeered. 2 were empty of passengers. 1 had just taken passengers aboard. The evacuation shuttles from Sigurdsson were ferrying base personnel to the empty 2 while the other was being evacuated. 1 shuttle came down and landed in a special landing zone next to the Naval Operations Center. The flares they used for this landing zone were different colored than the others, so the pilot could see it on his approach in the pre-dawn light. Jan and her staff, Jessen and his staff, and Bill and his staff from Intelligence Division all crowded aboard. The pilot took off and made for the CSS Lakshmibai. Jan and Bill took the Admiral's cabin on Lakshmibai. Megan Ming and Tian Jessen took other cabins on the flag deck, as did Bill's subordinate who ran the intelligence team for the Earth problem, Rear Admiral Leslie Hurley. Their staffs took bunks in the spaces assigned to Lakshmibai's Marines, who were being offloaded when they arrived. The intelligence team took over the Combat Information Center. Jan met with her new flag captain, Pavel Nimsky, who she knew from the Grand Tour and Kodu. They knew it couldn't be known in advance which ships would be on station in Sigurdsson at the time the Code Black came, if it did. They would have to work with whoever was on station. Jan had lucked out. Pavel Nimsky was good. Jan briefed him on the operation and the role of the Lakshmibai. She also oversaw the rest of the evacuation operation. When everybody was off Sigurdsson, she gave Pavel Nimsky the order, and the Lakshmibai sent the signal that detonated all the demolitions and imploded and then set afire the major buildings on Sigurdsson. Jan and Bill transferred to the CPS Star Runner, a passenger liner of the Commonwealth Star Lines, for the crossing to the rendezvous point. There was no way she was going to spend the month in transit without her kids if she didn't have to, and Lakshmibai was no place for toddlers. One of the Star Runner shuttles was docked to the Lakshmibai waiting for them. They made the transfer to the Star Runner. Star Runner began maneuvers to leave the system just as soon as Jan and Bill were belted into the swivel chairs in their cabin. They had an interconnected set of suites in the first-class cylinder for them, the kids, their household staff, and their staff's families. The CSF ships, the loaded freighters, the passenger liners, and the warships all spaced for the southern approaches to Jablanka, away from the incoming Earth fleet. In 1s and 2s and 3s, as they were ready to depart, they headed out. As they reached the outer system envelope, they transitioned into hyper and set out for the rendezvous point, an uninhabited system 10-day spacing from Earth. 4 hours into hyperspace, over the intercom of all the ships in transit, the following recording was played. Fellow Spacers, this is Admiral Jan Childers, the Chief of Naval Operations at the Commonwealth Space Force. Many of you know me personally or have worked with me over the years. Many of you know me simply as Jan. You may be wondering, why are we running away? Or why aren't we fighting? While this attack may have come as a surprise to you, it most assuredly did not come as a surprise to me and others in the command structure of the CSF. We have been planning for this eventuality for years. We are not running away. We are taking the fight to the enemy. We will assemble our own forces rather than waste them piecemeal against a large Earth fleet, and then we will space against Earth itself. Once assembled into a single fighting force, the Commonwealth Space Force will be the largest space fleet ever fielded. We will space to Earth, invest the planet, and overthrow the corrupt government that has launched this attack against us. No, fellow spacers, we are not running away. We are running toward the enemy. We will prevail, and we will make them rue the day they took up arms against the Commonwealth of Free Planets. Childers out. When the cheers died down, Senior Chief Gonzalez elbowed PO-1C Gunderson where they were standing in line for chow in the economy-class dining room of one of the passenger liners. See, told ya. She's a corker, that one is. I expected them to be cowards, but I didn't expect them to just up and run, said Fleet Admiral Jacob Turner, commanding the Earth Expeditionary Fleet. Something bothers me about this, sir. Of course, we're an overwhelming force, but I didn't expect them not to give us any resistance at all. That doesn't sound like the CSF. And their departure was so orderly it was almost like they'd planned for us to attack them, said Rear Admiral Fritz Schmidt, Fleet Tactical Officer. Well, Fritz, I don't have any worries about that. They couldn't have seen this coming. Fritz shrugged. Let's leave Admiral Courtney here and move on to Valor, Turner said. As the code black message spread across the Commonwealth, the scenario repeated itself again and again. The CSF pulled up stakes and pulled out of the system. Where the hell did they all go? This is the fourth system and there's no CSF anywhere, Turner said. Doesn't make sense. Unless they're combining their forces to assemble a big enough fleet to oppose us, Schmidt said. I'm getting a really bad feeling about this. I'm afraid I know where they went. We need to issue new spacing orders. To where? To Earth. Chapter 29. Earth. It took them a little over 3 weeks to get to the rendezvous point from Sigurdsson. The freighters were slower, as not all of them were fleet freighters, and the code black had to propagate out from Sigurdsson to the other fleet bases. Notice to the closer ones was tasked to destroyers, while the available fast courier boats went to the farther Commonwealth planets. Those fleets then had to space to the rendezvous. The longest trip there was almost 6 weeks. The result was that the first ships to arrive, those from Sigurdsson, waited almost 7 weeks while the fleet assembled. As each contingent came in, they brought their own fleet freighters, and slower, non-fleet freighters were drifting in all the time. All the warships were restocked as they arrived. The other thing that the freighters brought were remote control beam mounts. Lots of them. Over 3,000 of them had been stashed with the stores on various bases and came in on the freighters. These beam mounts were the new version that had latching mechanisms meant to connect to the warship's aft cargo racks between the radiators. Those aft cargo racks were only used on long voyages for extra stores, but they came in handy now. The beam mounts were distributed by the cargo shuttles of the freighters and latched to the warships, which required the orbiting vessels to halt rotation, latch the beam mounts to the ship, and then resume rotation. For most of this period, Jan and Bill stayed on the Star Runner with Peggy and Max, and kept in touch with their staffs aboard Lakshmi Bai. A week before the planned departure for Earth, they celebrated Max's 2nd birthday. Then they transferred back over to the Lakshmi Bai and stayed in touch with the kids and their household staff on board the Star Runner. Well, looks like everybody's here, ma'am. That last was Vice Admiral Chalk Rabouti's TF-51 from Boongard. They would have been last to here and the longest trip, said Rear Admiral Tian Jessen, the head of Jan's Black Strategic Group within the Office of Naval Operations Planning. They were so black, they didn't have a name. Everybody just called them Jessen. I think you're right. What about the council? We got almost everybody, ma'am. We count 91, including the chairman. Excellent. Okay, time to distribute the electronicers, and then let's put out the spacing orders. I like Plan Alpha. What do you think? Given the numbers we saw at Sigurdsson, ma'am, I think that would probably work best. It is our primary plan, after all. All right, let's make sure everyone has topped up their stores, and then let's do it. Orders went out. 1 shuttle each from a dozen battleships came to Lakshmi Bai and, 2 at a time, embarked 3 passengers and then departed back to their ships. Freight shuttles made trips from the huge freighters to the newly arrived task force, ferrying stores containers. At the appointed hour, the entire impossible assemblage set out in various directions for the system periphery, and one by one disappeared into hyper. Admiral Jorge Hernandez, Earth Home Fleet, or what was left of it, walked onto his flag bridge aboard ESN Thermopylae. What have you got, Bob? Multiple point sources appearing at the system periphery, sir. Looks like 300 so far. Given the spacing, it looks like it will be over 1,000 before it's over, Commander Robert Brody said. Signatures? Oh, they all look like drones so far, sir. Globular decoy pattern? That's a little old school. Yes, sir. Well, let's just sit tight and see how the ships and decoys sort out. Talk to me, Jessen. Yes, ma'am. It doesn't look like as many point sources as I would have expected. Their home fleet deploys about the moon, but I only see about 400 point sources. Could they have more hiding behind it? No, ma'am. I'm receiving sensor data from the other side as well. Strip the cupboard bare for the attack fleet? Perhaps, but if so, it means they have fewer holes than we thought, ma'am. That's okay with me. As the decoys closed in, they had taken on a unique structure, separating into 4 spheres of point sources. What do you make of that? Hernandez said. Don't know, sir. Nothing I've heard about before, Brody said. What do you think, Jessen? Time to go hot? Looks good to me, ma'am. Send the message to Zhang Ha. Yes, ma'am. Status change. Point source is powering up, sir, Brody said. Which ones? Actually, it looks like they all are, sir. What? It's rippling out across the sphere now, sir. They're all warships. That can't be. Nobody has that many warships. CSF might, sir. Their navy is always spread out all over. It's hard to get a good count. Energy levels make the inner shell destroyers, followed by light cruisers, heavy cruisers, and battleships. Is anybody close to their front shell? Yes, sir. ENS Fortitude was outbound when they came in. She's been decelerating to come back, and sort of slid most of the way into them. See if she can get a good look at one of those destroyers. Not too close. Maybe 7 light seconds or so. I want to verify these are real ships. Yes, sir. Ma'am, we've got this straggler out here, heavy cruiser. Looks like she was on the way out system when we came in. She's been getting herself turned around, but she's trying to get a look at the CSS Emory, Jessen said. Jan considered the icon on her plot. They don't believe every point source could be a real ship and want to get a closer look. Yes, ma'am. Well, let her look. And once she's had a chance to report back, have Emory punch her out with their remote control beam mount. Good data coming back from Fortitude, sir. She's definitely a destroyer, standard CSF design, and... Shit! Sorry, sir, Fortitude just blew up, sir, Brody said. What? That destroyer just took her out, sir. One shot. Battleship-grade beam at 8 light seconds. Damn. Hernandez was shocked. A destroyer platform with that kind of firepower? If the CSF had new offensive armament capability, this would get ugly fast. Brody, do you know which ship issued the order to bring up power levels? Yes, sir. It rippled out from this ship, highlighting on your plot. We need to know what's going on, and maybe we can get a chance to take out the commanding officer as well. What do you think of sending Hawthorne and her squadron right at that ship? Makes sense to me, sir. Here they come, ma'am. How did you know? Lucky guess. 8 battleships had separated from the Earth home fleet and were making their best speed at the Zhanghe. Jan had foreseen this response to the command to bring up power levels, which is why she had had the Zhanghe relay the message. She had also given all the ships in that portion of her sphere multiple remote control beam mounts. Any orders, ma'am? No. Admiral Liu has his orders. The destroyers are darting out of the way, sir. The light cruisers as well, though more slowly, of course. Admiral Hawthorne is holding her fire for the command ship. 13 light seconds. 12. Damn! Brody turned to Hernandez. Hawthorne's force has been destroyed, sir. 4 dozen battleship-grade beam weapons fired all at once. Every one of her ships took 6 hits. They're all gone. Those beams all came from the cruisers. Hawthorne never got within range of their battleships. Send the order to Zhanghe. Execute Operation Noose, Jan said. Sending the order, ma'am. Zhanghe relayed the order. As the order was received, each ship transitioned into hyperspace. Sir, they're transitioning into hyper. It's rippling across their formation. Were they all outside the system periphery? No, sir. Most of them were inside it. Ships moved to position in hyperspace and reported ready. They were aided by the new navigation software, deployed in the last 2 years, which allowed a single ship to take real-time gravimetric readings in hyperspace and determine the boundary between the inner and outer system envelopes on the fly. When all had reported in, new orders went out. The orders were executed nearly simultaneously due to the speed of transmission in hyperspace. Sir, many hyper-transitions. They all just hypered back in. Time delay is spreading them out, but it looks like they all transitioned simultaneously. Looks like about a third of their forces have positioned themselves directly above and below the planet. Sir, they're well within the system periphery, about a quarter of the way in. In some places, it's as much as 1,000 light seconds. Hernandez collapsed into his chair. They couldn't fight this. They couldn't even run away. They were completely encircled by overwhelming firepower, even leaving aside that almost half his remaining force was not capable of rated speeds or hypertransit. They had drained home fleet to fill out the expeditionary force and left themselves uncovered at home. But no one had expected the CSF to have so many platforms, or for those platforms to be so powerful and maneuverable. He was caught holding the end of the chain, but the mistakes had been made far above his pay grade. He owed it to his people not to throw their lives away because someone else had screwed the pooch, to find some way to get them out of this nightmare. Message coming in, sir. Go ahead, Com. Commanding Officer, Earth Home Fleet. This is Admiral Jan Childers, commanding CSF Task Force 1. I request and require your surrender. I have no desire to kill all your personnel. I myself was born on Earth and hold no grudge against your people. But if you do not surrender, I will reduce your force and your people to ashes. Childers out. There it was, in black and white. He knew what would happen. No matter who made the mistakes, it was his name that would go down in history as the guy who surrendered. Like that Cornwallis guy. Still, it was either that or go down in history as the guy who was too stupid to surrender and got almost 300,000 spacers killed for no good reason. And in the end, he still had to face himself in the mirror every morning. Com, record for transmission. Message begins. Fleet Admiral Jorge Hernandez, commanding Earth Home Fleet, to Admiral Jan Childers, commanding CSF Task Force 1. We surrender. Please calm your instructions. Message ends. Jan ordered Earth Home Fleet to retreat to orbit around Mars, which was currently in conjunction or nearly so. She sent half her destroyers and light cruisers to keep an eye on them from 15 light seconds out, with enough of the remote control beam mounts to reduce the entire home fleet if they had to. One straggler tried to make a break for it, and was fired on with a battleship-grade beam weapon from a destroyer and blew up. Everyone else seemed to take that as enough of a warning. The Earth Home Fleet had surrendered, but the Earth government had no intention of surrender. It was clear they thought they could just hide out on the planet and wait for the expeditionary fleet to come back. They also didn't think Jan would fire on the planet and kill millions of people to force a surrender. In that, they were right. I'm not going to fire on millions of innocent people because a corrupt kleptocracy doesn't give a damn about them, Jessen. But we knew this ahead of time. So let's fire up Operation Alarm Clock. Yes, ma'am. 3 dozen shuttles separated from battleships in orbit and dropped to the planet below. They each contained a Marine rifle squad and 1 specially trained electronic tech specialist. Those shuttle pilots had specific destinations. The Earth's primary network nodes. All shuttles report mission complete, ma'am. They are maintaining station to protect our control of the nodes. Repeat our call to the Earth government for surrender. Transmitting now. If they wouldn't surrender, Jan had another way to remove them from power. She now controlled the network nodes, which meant she now controlled the VR. They basically told us to drop dead, ma'am. Initiate wake-up call. Yes, ma'am. All over the planet, the VR system switched from whatever its users had been doing, whether watching videos, traveling, playing online games, or for the most of them, living beautiful pretend lives in a beautiful virtual world, to a series of videos of Earth and local government officials living it up, intermixed with videos of Earth's decaying cities. Gourmet meals, expansive estates, and pampered luxury for the few alternated with rat-infested crumbling cities, subsistence rations, and poverty for the many. If the VR user got tired of the channel and emerged from his VR set, he was confronted with the grim reality of his life after having seen the rich and powerful laugh and play. The only other live channel contained the names of local government officials, the addresses of their residences, and maps of how to get there. Now what do we do, ma'am? Rear Admiral Megan Ming, Jan's chief of staff, asked. We wait. Ma'am, the Earth government is trying to raise us now. Ignore it, Com. They want to initiate negotiations while dragging their feet until they can retake the network nodes. Now that we've exposed our big play, I'm done talking. The riot started within hours. The Earth government fell 2 days later when the Secretary General was found, dragged by the crowd from his hiding place out into the street, and hung from a non-functioning light pole. Most of the General Assembly was found and similarly treated. Local governments collapsed around the globe, as each local VR feed had highlighted their own local leaders living it up, and the crowd sought them out. The Earth descended into anarchy, but not starvation. On the farms, the robots still tended the crops, still manufactured the food, still shipped it into the cities. It was at that point Jan changed the VR programming. People were presented with a series of questions about how to proceed. What sort of government did they want? One option was to appoint new people to the existing positions within the current structure. One option was to become a protectorate of the Commonwealth of Free Planets, with the goal of setting up a new government by plebiscite through the VR within 2 years. Another option was to let the Earth Navy take over the government, also with the goal of setting up a new government within 2 years. Once they voted,
Their VR programming was back as before. Word got around, and the streets cleared as people rushed home to vote so their VR would work again. Jan had Admiral Hernandez on her ship with her to help monitor the voting. Earth had a huge Achilles heel, Admiral Hernandez. The VR system was a huge hole in your security. I could hijack it and inject any programming I wanted. In the end, people mostly just want to be left alone. The people of Earth didn't want a war with the CSF. The elites did, so they could have wider dominions, more power, more money. What they didn't plan on is the CSF bringing the war home to Earth. Not in terms of destruction, but in terms of showing people the destruction that was already there, that their own leaders had caused. And they didn't realize the ease of commandeering the VR systems to do it.
I can see that. I could always see that, to be honest, but you've really kicked over the anthill now.
So how do you think the voting is going to go? I don't know, to be honest. I worry about just putting new people into the same structures. I also worry about putting the Navy in charge. It's not like we haven't screwed up on a massive scale ourselves on the rare occasion. He chuckled, and Jan laughed. Now, the idea of putting your enemy in charge of your government seems strange too, like an occupation. As a result, I don't know what I'm hoping for.
And I expect we're going to see the Earth Expeditionary Fleet show up before too long,
Jan said. When Fleet Admiral Turner shows up, I'll go out and talk to him. Jake and I have known each other a long time, Hernandez said. I appreciate that, Admiral. So far, this has actually gone pretty well for everybody. I mean, given how it could have gone, wrecked fleets, ruined planets, that sort of thing. Agreed, Admiral.
The actual voting split pretty equally between having the Commonwealth take over Earth as a protectorate and having the military take over Earth as a junta, with either being an interim measure until a truly free government could be set up. A light cruiser transitioned from Hyper, scanned the system, and then hightailed it back into Hyper. 15 minutes later, 300 warships made Hyper transitions on the system periphery. Fleet Admiral Turner and the Earth Expeditionary Fleet had showed up, gunning for Bear. Hernandez went out to meet him in his flagship, the ENS Thermopylae. It was 2 nail-biting days for Jan before ENS Thermopylae could make it out to the Earth Expeditionary Fleet, hours more before it headed back toward Earth, and 2 days more back to Earth orbit. The Earth Expeditionary Fleet stayed where it was on the system periphery.
Jan met Hernandez and Turner in her ready room behind the flag bridge.
Ah, there you are, Admiral.
I've been looking for you all over, but after watching Jorge's sensor recordings, I think I'm just as glad our long-awaited meeting was delayed. Agreed, Admiral. Before Jan could say anything else, the voluble Turner cut in.
Is it true what Jorge says? That your plan is to give the Earth back to us and help us fix it?
That's what we're talking about, yes. We just want to go home. Well, I can enthusiastically surrender to such a magnanimous opponent, Admiral. If we can arrange a comm link here, I can put that into motion. Jan nodded to Ming, who was seated at the table, and she left to make arrangements.
I only have 300 or so of my ships along because you have some feisty neighbors out there, Admiral. We had to send defensive formations to every system, so you're going to have to detach units to take back your defensive posture. I can send some of mine along with yours to ease the transition so people don't get confused, but we should probably do that soon. Longer term, maybe we can help you with some of that.
And damage in the Commonwealth? What am I going to find when I get home, Admiral?
No damage, Admiral. That's not how I play the game, for one thing. No more than you did here. Plus, it was the Earth government's goal, or rather, the erstwhile Earth government's goal, to take the Commonwealth's economy over intact. It would have been against orders to break anything.
That's good news, Admiral. It's been more than a passing concern.
Understood, Admiral. You know Jorge and I never wanted this war, but it wasn't exactly our decision. That it sort of became the war that didn't happen is just fine with us. And the idea of, restructuring the Earth's government, shall we say, is a welcome one. I don't even have any qualms about how abruptly some of our former superiors, retired.
Ming came back and nodded to Jan. Go ahead, Admiral, Jan said.
Com, you there?
Turner asked of the deckhead above him.
Recording, sir, a voice came back.
Message begins. From Fleet Admiral Jacob Turner, commanding Earth's Expeditionary Fleet, to Rear Admiral Fritz Schmidt aboard ENS Salamis. Hey, Fritz, I surrendered. Ain't that a hoot? Go ahead and take the fleet into Mars orbit along with Jorge's ships. Slowly now, real polite-like, and make sure nobody's confused. We got a good deal going here. Also get a couple cruisers, maybe a heavy and a light, worked up to accompany CSF units back to each of their home planets. That way they can tell our guys the shooting's over,
Not that we did any, and call him back home. Turner out. Message ends. Go ahead and transmit that, Com, Jan said. Yes, ma'am. Com out. They presented the populace with another plebiscite through the VR system. The choice was between putting new people into the empty offices of the existing structure or having the military run the government while it designed a new, free government with the assistance of the Commonwealth of Free Planets. The latter option won with a huge percentage of the vote. A peace treaty was signed between the chairman of the Commonwealth, who had been along for the ride through all this, and Fleet Admiral Jacob Turner as the nominal head of state for Earth. Because the bulk of the council was along for the ride as well, although spread across dozens of ships, a series of hyperspace conference calls and virtual meetings between the councilors and both Turner and Hernandez, Turner's second, began work on a charter for the Earth, with the Commonwealth Charter, various planetary constitutions, and documents out of Earth's own history as source material. Jan sent over 600 of her ships home to take back possession of Commonwealth planets from the Earth detachments on station. Turner detached 64 cruisers in 32 pairs of 1 heavy cruiser and 1 light cruiser each to escort the CSF ships home and carry orders recalling his ships. Most of the councilors, including the chairman, chose to hitch rides on those detachments, but some got along so well with Turner and Hernandez and were having so much fun writing a charter for the Earth, they decided to keep working and catch later rides. The liners and freighters stayed at the rendezvous point. They waited for word of what had happened. It was almost 4 weeks after the fleet left before a fast courier ship arrived in the system and gave them a quoted order. They were to space for Earth. The system had been secured, the planet invested, the government ousted. The war that didn't happen was over. It was 10 more days before they arrived at Earth and joined the CSF forces around the planet. Mommy! Peggy came running down the hallway of the Admiral's deck on Lakshmi, bouncing alarmingly in the 0.4 G, with Max thumping along carefully behind. Jan swept Peggy up in one arm, then snagged Max as well as he came up in her wake. How are my little dearies? Mommy, we rode in a shuffle! It had been 45 days since Jan had seen her kids, their longest separation by far. Peggy was all excited about everything going on, but Max just clutched onto her neck like he would never let her go and whimpered. Jan knew this was a short separation as far as service families went, and made a mental note to review service policies for married spacers and spacers with children. Peggy looked over Jan's shoulder across the flag bridge with its displays, especially the big display on the far wall that showed the planet below, the image rotating with the ship's rotation. Wow, Peggy said. At this, Max pulled his head out of Jan's neck and looked as well. Wow, he mimicked. Jan turned around and showed the kids the flag bridge. It was a quiet period, or else the kids wouldn't be here, but there was always some action of people moving about. Peggy looked down at Jan's chest, and then around at all the other people walking about. Mommy, you have a lot more ornaments than everybody else. Mommy's been collecting ornaments a long time, Peggers. Bill came onto the flag bridge. I heard you guys were here, he said. Daddy, Peggy said, and held out her arms to her father. Bill took Peggy, but Max was happy where he was, and seemed to enjoy even more having his mother to himself. Jan had sent half her warships home, but she held the liners and freighters at Earth. If there was a double cross, they had no way to defend themselves. The rest of the CSF ships waited 2 months before first fast couriers and then a few CSF warships came back from Commonwealth planets, often in the company of returning Earth warships. As the Earth warships returned to their home system, and CSF ships began making runs between Earth and the Commonwealth, it became clear all was going as everyone had said. There was no subterfuge, no double game. Jan prepared to accompany the rest of the Commonwealth ships back home and take up her office once again at Sigurdsson, probably in a tent for a while, but hey, you can't have everything. As they were getting ready to depart, Turner and Hernandez visited Jan for one last time aboard CSS Lakshmi. Well, Admiral, we're going to miss you, Turner said. We owe you a tremendous debt, Admiral Childers, Hernandez said. The whole Earth does. Hey, don't forget I was born here. Helping clean it up was sort of unfinished business for me. Understood, Admiral, understood. Our efforts in that direction on a charter for Earth are going really well. You should come back and visit us sometime once we've got it up and running, Turner said. Maybe I'll do that.
We did bring you a little something to remember us by, though, Turner said. It's not like I'd forget you two. Even so, Turner turned to Hernandez, and Hernandez dug a long, flat box out of his coat pocket. Admiral, one thing we had to get done before you left was to create this, Hernandez said, and handed the box to Jan. She opened it and gasped. It was a 2.5-inch gold medal hanging on a ribbon. On one side, it had a bas-relief of the Americas. She turned it over, and on the opposite side, it had a bas-relief of the Eastern Hemisphere. The ribbon was the blue of the planet as seen from space. It's beautiful. We call it the Earth Medal. It will be our highest honor under the new charter. It pleases us no end you are its first recipient, Hernandez said. Hey, it's not every day you conquer a planet and they give you a medal to say thank you, Admiral, Turner said. With tears in her eyes, Jan hugged them both goodbye. Finally, 7 months after they had left Sigurdsson, the rest of the CSF fleet departed Earth for their respective planets within the Commonwealth. The liners and freighters left with them. The Star Runner arrived back in Jablonka orbit 8 months after she had left. The war that didn't happen involved a total of 2,100 warships with 2 million spacers aboard, the largest space war in history. There were only 9 ships lost in the Battle of Earth, 8 Earth battleships and 1 Earth heavy cruiser, for a total of just over 10,000 spacers dead. Half the loss of spacers a similar loss of ships by the CSF would entail, due to the Earth's ships' higher use of automation. Jan hadn't had to beat them. She had only had to convince them they couldn't win. That was the brilliance of Tian Jessen's tactical plan. It targeted the overturning of the Earth kleptocracy and avoided the piling up of a blood debt between Earth and the Commonwealth, setting the stage for a lasting peace. For his work on the Earth problem, Tian Jessen would be promoted to Vice Admiral and awarded the Distinguished Service Medal. Chapter 30. Phoenix. Of course, Sigurdsson wasn't there anymore. Much of it, anyway. The Code Black plan had included the destruction of much of Sigurdsson Fleet Base. There was simply too much information there about ships and personnel and doctrine to be able to evacuate it in any quick way. It would have been an intelligence treasure and compromised the prosecution of the war if the plans for the Battle of Earth could not be pressed to an early conclusion. Potential intelligence troves like the Network Operations Center, the Intelligence Division Headquarters, and the Tactical Division Headquarters were simply gone, imploded by demolitions placed by sappers during the evacuation, the debris set on fire by secondary incendiaries. Other facilities that would have been of use to an occupation force were also gone. Barracks, housing blocks, and mess halls were also demolished. Orbital fleet repair facilities remained. That had been a hard call, but without support from the ground, they would have been pretty useless, and the supplies for the orbital facilities had also been evacuated on the freighters. The Code Black orders had not entailed the destruction of any other fleet bases. They did not contain anywhere near the intelligence about overall CSF posture as did Sigurdsson, and they lacked sufficient facilities to sustain a planetary occupation force. By the time the second half of the fleet had returned to Earth, the building of temporary facilities at Sigurdsson was well underway. A fast courier vessel had been dispatched from Earth to Jablonka as soon as the Earth fleet had surrendered. It had activated contingency contracts put in place during the Code Black planning. Tens of thousands of construction workers had descended on the base, with plans that had been drawn up well in advance. The first order of business was the construction of a large tent city on open land the CSF owned next to the base proper to accommodate the returning staff. All of this was done by the time the first half of the CSF fleet had returned a month later. Huge barracks tents, mess tents, and office tents with plank floors stood row upon row over hundreds of acres. Then, the construction teams began the assembly of all the temporary buildings that the CSF had stockpiled. These were moved to the base from their off-site storage during the building of the tent city. The temporary buildings started going up next to the tent city. Once half of them were in place, the rest were used to replace the tent city, one row of tents at a time. Construction was also going on within the confines of the base proper. The first step was to clear the roadways of debris from the implosions. After that, heavy equipment moved in to begin preparing the building sites for the new buildings. Removal of the rubble of the old buildings would be last. When the Star Runner returned to Jablonka 3 months into the construction crews had just finished the first half of the temporary buildings and were ready to start replacing tents.
There was enough square footage, if barely, for the returning staff of Sigurdsson Fleet Base to take up their duties. With the shortage of space, however, shipboard crews taking planet leave after 8 months of continuous spacing were put up in hotels in Jezgra. Tourism and business travel having fallen off drastically during the war that didn't happen, hotel managers were ecstatic to find themselves 100% booked for 2 solid months as crews rotated for planet leave. The houses on the hill, Flag Row, and some other minor facilities had not been demolished during the evacuation. Jan, Bill, the kids, and their household staff moved back home, as did Kurt Wisniewski and Dejdish Pandey and their households. A shuttle from the Star Runner brought them all directly down to the hill, landing on the road in front of the houses. They arrived in the afternoon and had a dinner made from the non-perishable foods remaining in the pantries. After the kids were in bed, Jan and Bill moved out onto the front porch, watching the hum of activity across the old fleet base and the new tent city, continuing on through the night under the lights. "This may become my favorite view for the next year or two," Jan said. "It's just so interesting to watch all the construction." "Too bad you had to blow it all up," Bill said. "Had to be done. If the war had gone on, it was too tempting a target, as well as too tempting to get nailed down defending it. Without it, there was no focus to concentrate against. Earth would have dissipated their forces trying to hold down 32 planets while defending Earth. In a war of attrition, we win because they can't suffer any attrition. There's only one Earth. We had to keep there from being only one Commonwealth planet of interest, keep them from taking Sigurdsson and Jablonka and using them as a bargaining chip." "Oh, I understand. But it's going to be rough going for a while." "But it'll also reset our own thinking. There's much more to the CSF than Sigurdsson. Sigurdsson's really the least part of the Navy. It had gotten psychologically more important than it was, both to the Navy as a whole, and especially to the people who came here and spent their whole careers here. Graham wasn't the disease, he was a symptom. That whole, Sigurdsson is what's really important, you just shut up and do as you're told mentality that would allow them to uncover a Commonwealth planet for the sake of an exercise they thought was interesting. How crazy was that?" Jan asked. "So you tore it down so you could rebuild it differently?" "Well, it certainly shook the pillars of creation for the kind of people who thought the sun rose and set in the NOC. Maybe now they'll take a different view." 8 months in space would pretty much do that too," Bill said. "Yes, and we mixed up the Sigurdsson crowd with the spacers on the passenger liners, gave them exposure to some different worldviews. Even while spacers on the warships went out and won the war for them while they sat and did nothing. Worked out pretty well all around. And we get rid of a bunch of buildings that were getting pretty long in the tooth anyway." "Yep," Jan said. "Meanwhile, spacers on planet leave are in the hotels downtown, and base staffers are in tents. It's funny. There were 3 separate attempts by people within the NOC to modify the plans so that spacers would have planet leave in the tents, while Sigurdsson staffers would all be living in the hotels." "Really?" Bill asked. "Oh, sure. Never underestimate the entitlement attitude of a career Sigurdsson staffer. Why don't the spacers have to live in the tents while on planet leave?" "Simple. Because the rest of the time on board ship, they live like sardines with 8 bunks in a shoebox." Bill chuckled. "Well, I'd better hit the sack," he said. "I have to go into the tent in the morning." Jan laughed, and they both went inside. Appendix. Inhabited systems mentioned. Earth. Members of the Commonwealth of Free Planets. Bahia. Capital, Cabecera. Bliss. Boomguard. Calumet. Courtney. Bhutan. Jablonka. Capital, Jezgra. Kodu. Mali. Mountain Home. Natchez. Pahadan. Parchman. Serestic. Shanti. Valor. Waldheim. Outer Colony Polities. Brunswick. Firearm. Lautada. Paradiso. Samara. Tenerife. Willem. Notes on navigational notation. The Commonwealth Space Force uses the following standards with respect to navigational bearings and distances. Navigational bearing and distance are specified as rotation, mark minus, elevation, on point, at distance. All such references are with respect to a point, a baseline, and a plane. If no point is specified, the point is the ship, The baseline is the long axis of the ship projected through the bows, and the plane is defined by the plane of the ship with the command cylinders considered to be up.
If another ship is specified as the point, such as on the enemy, the point is the enemy ship, the baseline is the vector of the enemy ship's velocity, and the plane is the plane of the ecliptic. If a planet is specified as the point is the planet, the baseline is a line from the planet to the sun, and the plane is the plane of the ecliptic. If a sun is specified as the point is the sun, the baseline is a line from the sun to the primary inhabited planet, and the plane is the ecliptic. If the galactic center is specified as the point is the galactic center, the line is the line from the galactic center to the ship, and the plane is the plane of the galactic lens. Bearing angles are always specified as number. Designations such as 93 and 180 are not permitted. These are correctly specified as 093 and 180. An exception occurs for 000, which may be stated simply as 0, such as in 0 mark 0 or 0 mark 180. Rotation is specified as number in degrees clockwise from the projection of the baseline onto the plane when viewed from above. Leading zeros are included, not dropped. Number runs from 000 to 360. If the point is the ship, above means from above the ship with the command cylinders considered to be up. If the point is an enemy ship, a planet, or the sun, above means from the north side of the solar system as determined by the right-hand rule. With the fingers of the right hand in the direction of orbit of the planets, the thumb points north. If the point is the galactic center, above means from the north side of the galaxy as determined by the right-hand rule applied to the rotation of the stars about the galactic center. Elevation is specified as mark minus number in degrees up or down from the plane. Mark is used for bearings above the plane, and minus is used for bearings below the plane. Above is defined as for rotation. Leading zeros are included, not dropped. Number runs from 000 to 180. Distance is specified in light units, most frequently in light seconds. CSF ships, mentioned by class. First ship in class is underlined. Battleships. CSS Amazon, CSS Boudica, CSS Cleopatra, CSS Jeanne d'Arc, CSS Kriegsmädchen, CSS Lakshmibai, CSS Tomoe, CSS Zenobia, CSS Alexander, CSS Genghis Khan, CSS Julius Caesar, CSS Napoleon Bonaparte, CSS Yang Ha. Heavy cruisers. CSS Aluna Kamau, CSS Donald McNee, CSS Gerald Anson, CSS Guadalupe Rivera, CSS Hu Ming Lee, CSS Ika Kalani, CSS Jane Paxton, CSS Jacques Cotillard, CSS Manfred Koch, CSS Mateus Oliveira, CSS Minako Kusunoki, CSS Niels Isaacson, CSS Patrick Mazer, CSS Sonia Mehta, CSS Willard Dempsey. Light cruisers. CSS Aquitaine, CSS Catalonia, CSS Gujarat, CSS Kansai, CSS Midwest, CSS Provence, CSS Schwarzwald, CSS Szechuan, CSS Tuscany. Destroyers. CSS Brunau, CSS Clermont, CSS Emery, CSS Howard, CSS Maryville, CSS Pomona. CSF ships capabilities by class. Battleships. Classes: Cleopatra, Alexander. Crew complement 2400. Maximum acceleration 1.1 gravities. Guns number 6. Guns type battleship grade super heavy. Guns range 10 light seconds. Heavy cruisers. Classes: Gerald Anson. Crew complement 1200. Maximum acceleration 1.4 gravities. Guns number 3. Guns type heavy. Guns range 7 light seconds. Light cruisers. Classes: Tuscany. Crew complement 800. Maximum acceleration 1.7 gravities. Guns number 3. Guns type medium. Guns range 5 light seconds. Destroyers. Crew complement 400. Maximum acceleration 2.1 gravities. Guns number 3. Guns type light. Guns range 3 light seconds. Major awards and decorations to Jan Childers. The Commonwealth Charter Medallion, Battle of Kodu. CSF Combat Medal with 3 clusters, Battle of Parchman, Battle of Fire, Battle of Kodu, Battle of Earth. CSF Science Medal with cluster. Calculation of the system periphery, hyperspace modulation. Calculation of the inner and outer system envelopes. Distinguished Service Medal with 3 clusters, Battle of Valor, Battle of Cerestic, Battle of Calumet, Battle of Fire. Victorious Action Ribbon with 1 gold and 1 silver star. Battle of Valor, Battle of Parchman, Battle of Cerestic, Battle of Pahadan, Battle of Fire, Battle of Kodu, Battle of Earth. Theater of Service Ribbons. Valor, Parchman, Cerestic, Pahadan, Calumet, Bahia, Waldheim with star, Courtney, Natchez, Mali, Bliss, Bhutan, Mountain Home, Shanti, Kodu, Jablonka. The Earth Medal. Acronyms and terms. AAR, After Action Report. AO, Area of Operations. ATO, Assistant Tactical Officer. ATS, Advanced Tactics School. Below decks, cylinders on a ship containing enlisted quarters and mechanical areas such as propulsion, weapons control, etc. Bogey, an unidentified contact such as on radar. BTS, Basic Tactics School. Building book, designing a book of maneuvers. Bulkhead, wall on a spaceship. CCM, CSF Decoration, Commonwealth Charter Medallion. CFP, Commonwealth of Free Planets. CIC, Combat Information Center. Class 1 Secured Facility, the highest rated facility for the use or discussion of classified materials. CM, CSF Decoration, Combat Medal. CNO, Chief of Naval Operations. Commonwealth, Commonwealth of Free Planets. CPS, Ship Prefix, Commonwealth Passenger Ship. CSF, Commonwealth Space Force. CSL, Commonwealth Star Lines, Commercial Passenger Company. CSS, Ship Prefix, Commonwealth Spaceship. Deadhead, make a trip aboard ship while not serving, guest, ferry. Deck, floor in a spaceship. Deckhead, ceiling in a spaceship with a room directly above. Division, half of a squadron in CSF, 4 ships. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, a molecule of genetic instructions. Door, a physical closure on a doorway, may not be airtight. Doorway, opening in a bulkhead. DSM, CSF Decoration, Distinguished Service Medal. ENS, Ship Prefix, Earth Navy Ship. Enshin, martial arts combining karate and judo, founded in 1988. Exam, citizenship exam of the Commonwealth of Free Planets. Fleet Book of Maneuvers, CSF Standard Book of Maneuvers. Flotilla, 2 squadrons under 1 command, usually destroyers. G, 1 gravity, the amount of gravity one feels on Earth. Geosynchronous, west to east orbit in 24 hours, geostationary. Goat locker, chief's mess on a ship. Hatch, airtight cover on a hatchway in a deckhead or overhead. Hatchway, opening in a deckhead or overhead with a hatch. HQ, headquarters. Inner envelope, calculated volume inside the published system periphery allowing hyperspace cruise but not transition. JAG, Judge Advocate General, the legal arm of the CSF. JTO, Junior Tactical Officer. Ladderway, opening in a deckhead or overhead without a hatch. Light second, the distant light travels in 1 second, 186,282 miles. Light year, distance light travels in 1 year, 5.88 trillion miles. Low G, low gravity, gravity under 0.2 G. Metroplex, city and its suburbs, metropolitan area. LNS, ship prefix, Lottenden Navy ship. MP, military police. NOC, Naval Operations Center at Sigurdsson Fleet HQ. OCS, Officer Candidate School. Outer envelope, calculated volume inside the published system periphery allowing hyperspace cruise and transition. Overhead, ceiling in a spaceship without a room directly above. PhD, Doctor of Philosophy, the most advanced degree in a field. PR, Public Relations. PSS, ship prefix, Paradiso spaceship. R&R, rest and recuperation. SM, CSF decoration, science medal. Squadron, group of ships under one command, in CSF, 8 ships. SSN, ship prefixed Samaran Space Navy. STO, Senior Tactical Officer. System periphery, published boundary inside which hyperspace cruise and transition are dangerous to the ship. Topside, cylinders on a ship containing officers' quarters and command and control areas like the bridge, CIC, etc. TNS, ship prefix Tenerife Navy ship. UCS, Unarmed Combat School. UJ, University of Jablonka. VA, CSF decoration, Victorious Action Ribbon. VR, Virtual Reality. XO, Executive Officer, First Officer. 0G, completely weightless, in freefall.